Hello dear friends. Famous 5 on the Treasure Island. Chapter 8. Before we starts, kindly subscribe our channel, and press the bell icon, so you can get all updates, thanks. Exploring the wreck. Julian woke first the next morning. He awoke just as the sun was slipping over the horizon in the east, and filling the sky with gold. Julian stared at the ceiling for a moment, and then, in a rush, he remembered all that had happened the day before. He sat up straight in bed and whispered as loudly as he could. "Dick! Wake up! We're going to see the wreck. Do wake up!" Dick woke and grinned at Julian. A feeling of happiness crept over him. They were going on an adventure. He leapt out of bed and ran quietly to the girls' room. He opened the door. Both the girls were fast asleep, and curled up like a dormouse under the sheet. Dick shook George and then dug Anne in the back. They awoke and sat up. "Buck up," whispered Dick. "The sun is just rising. We'll have to hurry." George's blue eyes shone as she dressed. Anne skipped about quietly, finding her few clothes, just a bathing suit, jeans, and jersey and rubber shoes for her feet. It wasn't many minutes before they were all ready. Now, not a creak on the stairs, not a cough or a giggle, warned Julian, as they stood together on the landing. Anne was a dreadful giggler, and had often given secret plans away by her sudden explosive choke. But this time the little girl was as solemn as the others, and as careful. They crept down the stairs and undid the little front door. Not a sound was made. They shut the door quietly and made their way down the garden path to the gate. The gate always creaked, so they climbed over it instead of opening it. The sun was now shining brightly, though it was still low in the eastern sky. It felt warm already. The sky was so beautifully blue that Anne couldn't help feeling it had been freshly washed. "It looks just as if it had come back from the laundry," she told the others. They squealed with laughter at her. She did say odd things at times, but they knew what she meant. The day had a lovely new feeling about it. The clouds were so pink in the bright blue sky, and the sea looked so smooth and fresh. It was impossible to imagine that it had been so rough the day before. George got her boat. Then she went to get Tim, while the boys hauled the boat down to the sea. Alf, the fisher boy, was surprised to see George so early. He was about to go with his father, fishing. He grinned at George. "You going fishing, too?" he said to her. "My, wasn't that a storm yesterday? I thought you'd be caught in it." "We were," said George. "Come on, Tim. Come on." Tim was very pleased to see George so early. He capered round her as she ran back to the others, almost tripping her up as she went. He leapt into the boat as soon as he saw it, and stood at the stern, his red tongue out, his tail wagging violently. "I wonder his tail keeps on," said Anne, looking at it. "One day, Timothy, you'll wag it right off." They set off to the island. It was easy to row now, because the sea was so calm. They came to the island, and rowed around it to the other side. And there was the wreck, piled high on some sharp rocks. It had settled down now and did not stir as waves slid under it. It lay a little to one side, and the broken mast, now shorter than before, stuck out at an angle. There she is, said Julian, in excitement. Poor old wreck. I guess she's a bit more battered now. What a noise she made when she went crashing onto those rocks yesterday. How do we get to her? Asked Anne, looking at the mass of ugly, sharp rocks all around. But George was not at all dismayed. She knew almost every inch of the coast around her little island. She pulled steadily at the oars and soon came near to the rocks in which the great wreck rested. The children looked at the wreck from their boat. It was big, much bigger than they had imagined when they had peered at it from the top of the water. It was encrusted with shellfish of some kind, and strands of brown and green seaweed hung down. It smelled queer. It had great holes in its sides, showing where it had battered against rocks. There were holes in the deck too. Altogether it looked a sad and forlorn old ship, but to the 4 children it was the most exciting thing in the whole world. They rowed to the rocks on which the wreck lay. The tide washed over them. George took a look round. We'll tie our boat up to the wreck itself, she said. And we'll get onto the deck quite easily by climbing up the side. Look, Julian, throw this loop of rope over that broken bit of wood there, sticking out from the side. Julian did as he was told. The rope tightened and the boat was held in position. Then George clambered up the side of the wreck like a monkey. She was a marvel at climbing. Julian and Dick followed her, but Anne had to be helped up. Soon all 4 were standing on the slanting deck. It was slippery with seaweed, and the smell was very strong indeed. Anne didn't like it. Well, this was the deck, said George, and that's where the men got up and down. She pointed to a large hole. They went to it and looked down. The remains of an iron ladder were still there. George looked at it. I think it's still strong enough to hold us, she said. I'll go first. Anyone got a torch? It looks pretty dark down there. Julian had a torch. He handed it to George. The children became rather quiet. It was mysterious somehow to look down into the dark inside of the big ship. What would they find? George switched on the torch and then swung herself down the ladder. The others followed. The light from the torch showed a very queer sight. The underparts of the ship were low-ceilinged, made of thick oak. The children had to bend their heads to get about. It seemed as if there were places that might have been cabins, though it was difficult to tell now, for everything was so battered, sea-drenched and seaweedy. The smell was really horrid, though it was mostly of drying seaweed. The children slipped about on the seaweed as they went round the inside of the ship. It didn't seem so big inside after all. There was a big hold under the cabins, which the children saw by the light of their torch. That's where the boxes of gold would have been kept, I expect, said Julian. But there was nothing in the hold except water and fish. The children couldn't go down because the water was too deep. 1 or 2 barrels floated in the water, but they had burst open and were quite empty. I expect they were water barrels, or barrels of pork or biscuit, said George. Let's go round the other part of the ship again where the cabins are. Isn't it strange to see bunks there that sailors have slept in, and look at that old wooden chair? Fancy it still being here after all these years. Look at the things on those hooks too, they are all rusty now, and covered with seaweedy stuff, but they must have been the cook's pans and dishes. It was a very queer trip round the old wreck. The children were all on the lookout for boxes which might contain bars of gold, but there didn't seem to be one single box of any kind anywhere. They came to a rather bigger cabin than the others. It had a bunk in one corner, in which a large crab rested. An old bit of furniture looking rather like a tablet with two legs, all encrusted with grayish shells, lay against the bunk. Wooden shelves, festooned with gray-green seaweed, hung crookedly on the walls of the cabin. "This must have been the captain's own cabin," said Julian. "It's the biggest one. Look, what's that in the corner?" "An old cup," said Anne, picking it up. "And here's half of a saucer. I expect the captain was sitting here having a cup of tea when the ship went down." This made the children feel rather queer. It was dark and smelly in the little cabin, and the floor was wet and slippery to their feet. George began to feel that her wreck was really more pleasant sunk under the water than raised above it. "Let's go," she said, with a shiver. "I don't like it much." "It is exciting, I know, but it's a bit frightening too." They turned to go. Julian flashed his torch round the little cabin for the last time. He was about to switch it off and follow the others up to the deck above when he caught sight of something that made him stop. He flashed his torch onto it, and then called to the others. "I say. Wait a bit. There's a cupboard here in the wall. Let's see if there's anything in it." The others turned back and looked. They saw what looked like a small cupboard let in level with the wall of the cabin. What had caught Julian's eye was the keyhole. There was no key there, though. "There just might be something inside," said Julian. He tried to prise open the wooden door with his fingers, but it wouldn't move. "It's locked," he said. "Of course it would be. I expect the lock is rotten by now," said George, and she tried to. Then she took out her big strong pocket knife and inserted it between the cupboard door and the cabin wall. She forced back the blade and the lock of the cupboard suddenly snapped. As she had said, it was quite rotten. The door swung open, and the children saw a shelf inside with a few curious things on it. There was a wooden box, swollen with the wet sea water in which it had lain for years. There were 2 or 3 things that looked like old, pulpy books. There was some sort of glass drinking vessel, cracked in half, and 2 or 3 funny objects so spoiled by sea water that no one could possibly say what they were. "Nothing very interesting except the box," said Julian, and he picked it up. "Anyway, I expect that whatever is inside is ruined. But we may as well try and open it." He and George tried their best to force the lock of the old wooden box. On the top of it were stamped initials H.J.K. "I expect those were the captain's initials," said Dick. "No, they were the initials of my great-great-great-grandfather," said George, her eyes shining suddenly. "I've heard all about him. His name was Henry John Kieran. This was his ship, you know. This must have been his very private box in which he kept his old papers or diaries. Oh, we simply must open it." But it was quite impossible to force the lid up with the tools they had there. They soon gave it up, and Julian picked up the box to carry it to the boat. "We'll open it at home," he said, his voice sounding rather excited. "We'll get a hammer or something, and get it open somehow. Oh, George, this really is a find." They all of them felt that they really had something mysterious in their possession. Was there anything inside the box, and if so, what would it be? They longed to get home and open it. They went up on deck, climbing the old iron ladder. As soon as they got there, they saw that others besides themselves had discovered that the wreck had been thrown up from the bottom of the sea. Golly! Half the fishing smacks of the bay have discovered it, cried Julian, looking round at the fishing boats that had come as near as they dared to the wreck. The fishermen were looking at the wreck in wonder. When they saw the children on board, they hallooed loudly. "Ahoy there! What's that ship?" "It's the old wreck," yelled back Julian. "She was thrown up yesterday in the storm." "Don't say any more," said George, frowning. "It's my wreck. I don't want sightseers on it." So no more was said, and the 4 children got into their boat and rowed home as fast as they could. It was past their breakfast time. They might get a good scolding. They might even be sent to bed by George's fierce father, but what did they care? They had explored the wreck and had come away with a box which might contain, well, if not bars of gold, one small bar, perhaps. They did get a scolding. They had to go without half their breakfast, too, because Uncle Quentin said that children who came in so late didn't deserve hot bacon and eggs, only toast and marmalade. It was very sad. They hid the box under the bed in the boys' room. Tim had been left with the fisher boy, or rather, had been tied up in his backyard, for Alf had gone out fishing, and was even now gazing from his father's boat at the strange wreck. "We can make a bit of money taking sightseers out to this wreck," said Alf. And before the day was out, scores of interested people had seen the old wreck from the decks of motor boats and fishing smacks. George was furious about it, but she couldn't do anything. After all, as Julian said, anybody could have a look.